In the days following the death of her brother-in-law, Rudolph Valentino, Guglielmi Valentino granted an interview to a reporter from La Stampa in Turin. It was published on August 27, 1926, and titled "The Deceased Man Who Is So Troubling New York: The Story of Rudolph Valentino as Related by His Sister-in-Law." Through a fortunate happenstance, we found ourselves engaging in a conversation with a close relative of Rudolph Valentino, the film star who just passed away, with news of his passing filling newspapers around the world. A brother of the famous actor Alberto Guglielmi, ex-major in the army, who left the military service to devote himself to the film business in his brother's career, was in Paris for professional reasons. His wife was in Turin, on her way to meet her husband in France, when news of the death of her relative was broadcast. Immediately, Mr. Guglielmi joined his wife in our city, and then left for America. The lady, on the other hand, is still in Turin, and residing in an elegant apartment. We spoke with her, the sister-in-law of Rudolpho Valentino, a young, very distinguished, gentle lady. She greeted us with gestures of exquisite kindness. The pain is too recent and acute when she begins to speak of the deceased, and her eyes fill with tears and her voice trembles. Quote, "Dead at 31, imagine. And we left him, my husband and I, only a month ago when he was so full of life and hope. We said goodbye in New York on July 24th. Rudolpho came from Los Angeles with us to accompany us and to attend the premiere of his film in New York. This was to take place on the 26th, 2 days later. Who could have thought such a catastrophe could occur? Once in Italy, we received the first sad telegram from his secretary. Rudolpho, returning to his room one evening, passed out while pressing his hands to his stomach, a lightning attack of appendicitis. Then came the operation, the complications, the peritonitis, and the end." End quote. The escape to America. Little by little, the lady is reassured, and she shows us a large photograph of Rudolph Valentino in the costume of his latest character, dressed in a sumptuous oriental costume and a large turban, with his face austere, exhausted. At the bottom of the photograph, a dedication by Rudolph, in round, clear handwriting, as that of a man of position. Mrs. Guglielmi, despite her bitter condolences, does not hesitate to speak with a journalist. During this week, local and overseas newspapers have published many inaccurate accounts of the deceased, some of which are ridiculously false. She therefore welcomes this possibility to put things back in their precise order as a pleasant occasion and also as a duty. Regarding the life of her brother-in-law, she relates in broad terms how she, in over a decade since she entered the family, knew and loved him like a brother. Rudolpho Valentino, or better, Rudolpho Guglielmi, was born in 1895 in Castellaneta, Bari, to a very good family. His father, a veterinarian in Castellaneta, was in charge of the conduct and management of the slaughterhouse. The mother was French, daughter of engineer Barbin, who came from France to build the Bari-Castellaneta railway line. Rudolph's father was also a captain in the army and lived in Rome, where he completed a special course in hygiene and bacteriology. It was there his first child, Alberto, a few years older than Rudolpho, was born. The family moved to Taranto when Rudolpho was 8 years old. 3 years later, his father died. The widow enrolled the boy in boarding school in Perugia, and then in the esteemed Neri School of Agronomy. When he was about 17 or 18 years old, Rudolpho left school with his diploma. But the idea of being an agronomist didn't please him, as he was, as a child, of a lively and restless temperament, as the adventurous temperament manifested in him. He still had no precise ideas in mind, but he wanted to do something special, something great. He wanted to see the world. Italy, he said, was too small for him. His mother wanted to please him and gave him permission and money to enable him to visit America. Mind you, young Rudolpho was to visit America, but not stay there. It was, according to the agreements made by the family, a kind of round trip. Conversely, the young man who left in 1914 never returned. He liked America and American people and felt at home. He wrote explaining he was fine and did not plan to return. He disobeyed, in a certain way, the will of his family. But, on the other hand, he took care not to give the family sorrow or trouble and never resorted to them for help. Professor of Tango. Rudolph began by working as an agronomist. Using his diploma, he designed gardens, took care of flowers and plantations, and earned what he needed to live. But he was in the countryside, and he didn't like the countryside. He inspired to the bustling and multifaceted life of the city, of the great cities of the New World. He then wandered from one metropolis to another, curious to see and to know, eager for the new, with a confused desire and presentiment of glory and wealth. And in the meantime, to get by in those foreign and sometimes hostile environments, he became a tango teacher because he knew how to dance very well. He also found humble jobs, but always approached them with honesty and with nobility of understanding. He wanted glory and fortune, and his persistence resulted in his being rewarded. The one and then the other came quickly to greet him and threw open the doors for him. This was in Los Angeles, the metropolis of American and world cinema. The young man began, like everyone else, by being an extra and by interpreting the first little characters with the nom de guerre of Rudolph Valentino. Gradually, he climbed all the steps of his career. In The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, he was cast in the first role of great importance. It was the baptism of celebrity. A new movie star had arisen to shed its light around the world. Quote, "If you think," comments the lady, "that he started to act in 1919, his was a very rapid career. But it was deserved. He earned it. You have no idea how difficult it is to establish yourself in the artistic field of cinema, especially in America and especially for foreigners. My brother-in-law succeeded, both for his artistic aptitudes and for the qualities of a tenacious, tireless worker. His was not a walk of roses, not even lately. He had the passion for the cinema in his blood. One would have said he was born for this career, and he burdened himself with the rigors of rehearsing and filming in the studios like no other. Perhaps it was that passion which relieved him of fatigue. Rudolph Valentino was, believe me, an example of will and work. Indeed," continues our kind conversationalist, "in this regard I must make an observation. Many have judged Rudolph Valentino as effeminate. Nothing is more grossly wrong. It was enough to exchange a few words with him. It was enough to see him to be convinced otherwise. He was, yes, very thorough, to the point of scruple, in his personal grooming and dress. But his was a proud male character. His was full of energy and will. I don't know how many men have his moral and physical strength. Moral strength has shown it throughout his life, and having set himself a goal of greatness which, at the cost of efforts and sacrifices, he was able to reach. His physical strength showed in his tirelessness to work. He demonstrated it, for example, in his exercises as a skilled horseman and consummate car driver. He made rides which would be exhausting for another. He drove the 12-hour drive from Los Angeles to San Francisco at the wheel of his car and was soon ready for his return. Prodigal and Generous. As we know, the American newspapers report the news, determined to arouse amazement, that Valentino left only $500,000 in personal wealth. Mrs. Guglielmi, on the other hand, is not surprised by this circumstance. Quote, "He was," she says, "of great expense and greater generosity. He spent a lot, but he gave even more, to the left and to the right, without counting it and without thinking about it. He had no sense of the value of money at all, as another practical aspect of life which escaped him. He was happy if he saw the happiness around him, and he did his best to surround himself with that happiness for himself and for others." End quote. Are you referring to, I ask, his famous request for American citizenship? My brother-in-law demonstrated certainly a sense of gratitude toward the country which hosted him and fulfilled all his aspirations. But there was also a practical reason in him. You know, you need to know those environments to understand them. American citizenship grants certain rights which one who reaches a certain social height cannot do without. These rights which, moreover, if they are to the advantage of the individual, reverberate also with advantage among the Italian community, precisely because as a more respected individual, one assumes a socially higher position. I am sure Rudolfo took that step both for himself and for his compatriots, as has happened and happened to other Italians. The accusations about him were made in error. This is demonstrated by the fact that he did not become an American citizen when he was a nobody, and he needed to ingratiate himself with people and environments. He took that step only when he was inevitably almost forced to do so." End quote. And here the lady recalls another complaint against Valentino, that of not having returned to Italy for the war and being labeled a deserter. No desertions, she says. Rudolfo Guglielmi was, while in America, repeatedly subjected to health examinations by the Italian authorities and exonerated for health reasons. Divorced after 6 hours. Our Rudolfo, concludes the lady, has in all respects held his Italian name high in America, always and everywhere. How do you explain the frenetic success of Rudolph Valentino in the American public, and especially in the female audience? She answers, they must have endorsed him because of his great undeniable artistic gifts, his physical qualities, of his race. There are undoubtedly some distinguished actors and handsome young people in American cinema. But Rudolfo imposed himself more, perhaps by the exotic, which gave him the appearance or manner of the Latin race, whose characteristics were so deeply imprinted on him. The enthusiasm of the American crowds, however, must be commensurate with the great passion which thrives over there for the cinema, a passion of which we in Italy have no idea. Here, our audiences, in comparison with America, represent ice cold or in the least lukewarm water compared to fire. This is another reason why Rudolph Valentino was idolized there." End quote. And here we touch on the romantic relationships of the famous actor. And however delicate, as scrupulous interviewers, we do not feel like giving up. The kind lady, however, briefly also responds to our curiosity on the subject. Quote, Rudolph Valentino was, in love and marriage, not a fortunate and happy man, in 2 marriages and 2 divorces. The first divorce occurred only 6 hours after the marriage was celebrated, the second after 2 years. It is useless to speak of the first. The second union was, for those 2 years, very happy. The spouses loved each other tenderly. It seemed that the idyll was to last forever. But instead, suddenly, it ruptured. End quote. If we understand the thought of our conversationalist, the divorce was a clash of race, a different way of approaching and interpreting marriage and the inherent obligations. Although he was Americanized, Rudolph Valentino remained in his conception of love an Italian, sentimental and passionate. Instead, we know the American woman is more positive and practical. She puts her independence before everything and is capable of sacrificing anything for it. The contrast which led to the separation of the spouses must probably have arisen around the way of interpreting a wife's independence. Rudolph was genuinely saddened. The sentimental and good side of his character is shown in this circumstance. He could no longer see himself in the house, which had been the nest of his happiness, and felt overwhelmed by melancholy, deciding to change his home. The brother and sister-in-law traveled to Los Angeles, where they stayed about 6 months at his invitation. This was to keep him company, to amuse him, to help him set up his new home, which was a magnificent villa in the suburb of Los Angeles, Hollywood, and a picturesque location from which it is named Falcon Lair. Therefore, the knowledge of the sentimental relationships of the great idol of the female public holds a surprise for us. He was indeed loved, idolized, and even pursued by millions of women. Although, in effect, in love this was not his reality, and in the sense that perhaps in the midst of so many offers of love, he was unable to find true love, the feminine soulmate he so longed for. He conceived and asked for love in the Italian way. The American woman answered him, but in English. In this there was not so much understanding, and he remained dissatisfied, disappointed. Mysteries of the human psyche. And now, let's confess. Before Rudolph Valentino, the actor, everyone bowed, recognizing him as one of the most correct, most communicative, most intelligent artists. But besides the light of that glory, there was also a shadow, next to the artist, the man. It seemed the man was too lucky, too caressed, and arriving too soon. Perhaps there is an attitude of envy and wickedness in us, as we stand in front of all those who reach such heights. But not any more. Now we have met Rudolph Valentino, as an artist and a man. We have seen him in his light and in his shadow. We have seen him work, struggle, suffer like us, the commonality of all mortals. And we have repented. We have reconciled with him. We appreciate the man as well as the artist. The article is signed Ubaldo Leva, and it has been translated for you from the Italian by Renato Floris.